Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Welcome. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The death toll continues to rise as the war between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon escalates. We have an update. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation says the debt under Justin Trudeau has now doubled over the past 9 years. The federal director of the CTF will have the details. And this is the start of National Truth and Reconciliation Week. Special events took place to recognize the occasion at both Lethbridge City Hall and at the University of Lethbridge.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. With the death toll now topping 450 people, Israel's prime minister is urging civilians in Lebanon along the border to leave their homes. Benjamin Netanyahu issued the warning as Israeli warplanes continue to strike alleged Hezbollah targets in southern and eastern Lebanon. Israel says the terrorist group is using civilian areas to hide weapons. Residents in targeted areas were ordered to leave ahead of the airstrikes. According to Joe Federman of the Associated Press, tensions continue to rise.
There were the exploding pagers and walkie-talkies in Lebanon in attacks that were attributed to Israel. Then Israel assassinated a top Hezbollah commander. Hezbollah has responded with increasingly heavy barrages of rocket fire on northern Israel. Israel has now begun using a tactic that we've seen in Gaza. It has issued evacuation orders to villages in Lebanon where it plans on striking. Israel says Hezbollah uses these areas to hide its weapons. Israel says it has struck hundreds of targets and inflicted heavy damage on Hezbollah. But scores of people have been killed, and thousands of people are now being forced to evacuate their homes with no knowledge of when they'll be able to return.
According to TBN Israel correspondent Yair Pinto, the war between Israel and Hezbollah is well underway. Israeli military officials say at least 150 projectiles were launched towards Haifa on Sunday. The IDF, meanwhile, struck back hard by eliminating top Hezbollah commanders following an airstrike. Pinto says northern Israel is preparing for even more attacks by the terrorist group Hezbollah.
The war in the north has begun. Its large barrages of Hezbollah rockets have been fired deep into Israel, and the IDF is increasing its own strikes on Hezbollah positions all over Lebanon. This follows the assassination of some of Hezbollah's most senior Radwan Force field commanders in an airstrike on a Radwan Force commanders meeting in the heart of Beirut's Dahia neighborhood. 16 other senior Hezbollah operatives were also eliminated in this strike, according to the IDF assessment. In response to the latest attacks, Hezbollah opened unprecedented fire on the north of Israel. They say their target was the Air Force base in Ramat David, but most of their rockets hit civilian areas, including a barn filled with cows in Bet She'arim in the lower Galilee. In response, the IDF is changing the directives of the Home Front Command from Haifa and north, preparing for a large attack by Hezbollah. Meanwhile, in the Gaza Strip, the Air Force attacked about 20 terror targets in the last 24 hours. Elsewhere, in the Palestinian enclave of Gaza, Hamas terrorists looted aid trucks and briefly escaped before being eliminated from the air.
Recent reports now say at least 30 Hezbollah members were killed and more than 2,800 were injured when their pagers went off and exploded. According to our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, many within Israel feel the pager attacks were poetic justice.
You know, a lot of the Hezbollah members lost their eyes, and the Islamic Republic, the regime in Iran, they're fixated on gouging out the eyes of especially female protesters who are going out onto the streets, peaceful protesters, and poking out their eyes or shooting them in the eyes. And this, again, eye for an eye, almost literal in this case. A lot of them losing their, they call this, Operation Below the Waist. It's really an interesting, way to look at it. Obviously, pagers, they're war on their belts, but as we know, rape being another way of resistance for terror organizations and for the Islamic Republic. And here we have these operatives, getting injured below the waist.
Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari will also have details on how a reward for information leading to the capture of Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro has increased from $15 to about $100 million. She'll explain, have more details in the second half of our program. Well, it is official. The national debt in Canada has now doubled under the leadership of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. According to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, it took around 24 prime ministers 150 years to rack up a $616 billion debt. But in the last 9 years, it now stands at $1.23 trillion. Now, to chat about this in more detail is the federal director of the CTF, Franco Terrazzano, joins us once again from Ottawa. Franco, how much will that cost the average Canadian taxpayer to service that debt?
For starters, a baby born today is already on the hook for about $30,000 in federal government debt alone. And then there's the interest charges that are costing taxpayers more than $1 billion every single week. And in fact, every penny that you're paying in the federal sales tax is now going to pay interest on the Trudeau government's debt. And also, the federal government is wasting more money on interest charges than it's going to send the provinces in health transfers. So the Trudeau government's debt is completely out of control. In less than a decade, Trudeau has doubled the debt, and Canadians are paying dearly because this massive debt, if the government doesn't cut spending, your taxes are going up, and the government will keep wasting more of your money paying interest on the debt.
Now, Franco, new information from the Parliamentary Budget Officer forecasts the next federal budget to be balanced, but not until the year 2040. That would mean how much more added to the debt?
That would mean almost $300 billion added onto the debt, right? And that's data from the Parliamentary Budget Officer that shows that under the status quo, the federal government won't balance the budget until 2040. You know, another decade and a half worth of deficits. And also that's assuming that the federal government doesn't announce any more spending and the economy grows every single year. But not only that, you also have to pay interest on the debt, right? So if we don't get a balanced budget from Ottawa until 2040, well, you're looking at, more than $800 billion lost just to pay interest on the debt, which is a cost to every Canadian of about $18,000 each between now and 2040. So that just shows why we need the federal government to stop wasting money like crazy and to cut its spending.
Thanks so much, Franco. That was the federal director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Franco Terrazzano, joining us from Ottawa. The city of Lethbridge celebrated the start of Truth and Reconciliation Week. Officials recalled the importance of continuing to strengthen the path of healing with our Indigenous communities. BCN's Heidi Echevarria was at the event at City Hall and has the details.
Although September the 30th is the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, today began the activities to honor those who survived the residential schools and those who are no longer with us. The ceremony began with prayer, words that invite to continue building a path of healing and reconciliation, as well as traditional Indigenous dance. The First Nation coordinator of the Holy Spirit School Division explains what the Week of Truth represents for students.
An Indigenous settler on these lands, that the role that it serves for our students is to really become aware of and become educated to the truth of what happened when it comes to residential schools, but not limited to that. Really looking at the resilience and the celebrating of the Indigenous culture as a whole. And a lot of it is a sense of understanding of identity, and then growing to a point where we can include others and their true identity. And then with that said, it can start from Orange Shirt Day and why we wear orange on September 30th to honor, but honoring with action. And so, learning what it means to be an ally. And it's not just one day or 1 week. It has to happen at all times. And so with everything from hearing stories to being able to experience things like going onto the land.
Focusing a lot on allyship this year, what we can do within the community as allies, and how do we better educate ourselves. I see a real sense of people wanting to know the truth, and what we as normal Lethbridgians can do.
For Bridge City News, I'm Heidi Echevarria.
Now, the University of Lethbridge commemorated the beginning of National Truth and Reconciliation Week on Monday with a ceremony at the University Centre for the Arts Building. The university's Igeskini Indigenous Services, which is leading much of the events this week, kicked off with a prayer and the burning of sweetgrass. It was then followed by a Treaty 7 acknowledgement with Elder Shirley Crowshoe giving a rundown on the history of the treaty signing. Blackfoot Elder Francis First Charger was in attendance, and he says students at the U of L will get to learn more on the history of residential schools and the region's Indigenous roots.
I think I have to commend the University of Lethbridge. They're recognizing and very inclusive about our ways, and also they allow us to be supportive of the activities coming this week. There's a lot of things happening. I can't come to all of them, but I'm glad I'll be able to come today. Each tribe has different ways of doing things, but some things are in general. We all pray quite a bit. I think that's how we survive, was through our prayers and spirituality. Different people come to see us. We tell them about our ways and how we handle things. We got values, how we take care of different things, how we view the world, nature, how to respect it, and so forth. And I think they come away with something a little differently they didn't realize, just like me. The residential schools, I didn't know what happened. But, they're getting to know how those are. And we provide encouragement to keep going. They're going to be worth it at the end when they graduate.
The legislation making National Day for Truth and Reconciliation a stat holiday was passed in 2021. Well, we enjoyed a beautiful day here in Lethbridge with above seasonal values. Jeanette Rocher is now with a quick peek at the forecast. Jeanette, even though it's officially autumn, it'll feel more like summer this week.
Yeah, our autumn solstice arrived Sunday, and, well, it's been a beautiful couple of days for fall, but it's about to get sweltering, even by midsummer standards. So we saw a lovely high of 24 degrees today, even overnight low this evening, 16 degrees. But what's happening is we're seeing a warm mass of air from the U.S. come up and bringing with it temperatures up to 29 and 30 degrees on a Tuesday and Wednesday. Nice sunny skies, too, but a wind from the west up to 60 kilometers per hour. That's today, tonight, and into tomorrow. But for most of the week, the most part, seeing clear skies, sunny conditions, what I like to call beach-like weather, up until the weekend, that is, and I'll be back later with those details. Hal?
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. Canadians could see another disruptive strike. The union representing grain workers at terminals in Metro Vancouver says it has served its employer with a 72-hour strike notice. Since the Grain Workers Union Local 333 says it served the notice at 7 a.m. on Saturday, the job action could begin on Tuesday. Union negotiators say the employer was handed a comprehensive package last Thursday, and the next day, the Vancouver Terminal Elevators Association indicated it had no counteroffer. BC Lieutenant Governor Janet Austin officially signed the writ for the October 19th vote, and leaders from each party have now kicked off their election campaigns. The provincial NDP leader, David Eby, took a few moments to slam the BC Conservative leader.
John Rustad came to the mic and said, and you wonder why his handlers don't make him more available for questions. He comes to the mic and he says, oh yeah, on the housing crisis, I don't think the government has a role to play here. Government's not the answer. Government isn't going to help deliver affordable housing for people. Well, I'll tell you what, John, if I'm elected as Premier, if I earn the trust of British Columbians, ensuring that every British Columbian has access to an affordable, high-quality home in the community they love is priority one every day for Premier.
The Canadian Hockey League announced that 5 Western Hockey League clubs have submitted bids to host the 2026 Memorial Cup. They are the Lethbridge Hurricanes, Medicine Hat Tigers, Kelowna Rockets, Brandon Wheat Kings, and the Spokane Chiefs. Now, the bids will be based on 4 categories, which are business operations, community engagement, event logistics, and hockey operations. Officials with the CHL say the winning bid should be known sometime by the end of December. Now, of the 5 clubs bidding for the 105th edition of the Memorial Cup, both the Lethbridge Hurricanes and the Medicine Hat Tigers are looking to host the event for the first time in their franchise's history. The fact that people do not feel a sense of belonging to their community is a real issue that concerns many. A survey conducted by the YMCA Canada found that 60% of Canadians feel disconnected from their communities. The executive director of the Lethbridge Group, Jennifer Petracek-Kolb, says around 16% of people surveyed says they've never felt a sense of community at all. She explains why folks are feeling a little bit of a disconnect.
So some of the reasons that were noted were because of electronic devices, because people are more apt to scroll through social media, because people, if they're unemployed, they have less communication with others or less sense of interaction with others or community with others. People were feeling more isolated. You know, personally, I think that part of the COVID pandemic that had us isolating from others, we changed our habits. The habits of people changed. And so what we're looking to do is remind people that if they're feeling comfortable, if they're feeling like it's safe for them, that the YMCA is a place where they can come and belong into the community while interacting with others. Making that conscious effort to get out of the house, get out into community, you know, have a walk with you in your neighborhood, say hi to your neighbors, chat about your day. I wanted to remind our local community that wherever you live, regardless of where you live, the YMCA offers financial assistance for people who are low income, who meet the threshold for qualifying for that assistance in their region or in their neighborhood or in their cities.
The research is from a survey of 1,501 Canadians under the age of 55, and it was conducted from August 29th through September 3rd. Hundreds of friends and family members of Ron Buckshot Barge attended a public memorial honoring the longtime Calgary TV host. Buckshot and his sidekick Benny the Bear entertained Calgarians for around 30 years with songs, puppets, the birthday book, and his battered cowboy hat before passing away last month. His kids say Buckshot was also a huge Flames fan, so they asked fans to show up in red.
We put out the request because my daddy was a Flames fan.
From day one.
From day one.
Yeah.
So yeah, we asked just because Dad, we'd have the sea of red. So we asked for people to wear.
Yeah, you couldn't be another fan. There were only Flames fans. And so no matter what, you're a Flames fan if you were born in this family. And I have a grandson who wanted to break that tradition once, and it didn't go so well. So he's now a Flames fan.
And his jersey's in the room. He will be wearing it.
I will wear. We'd love this.
Oh, yeah. He would love this.
I think in our heart of hearts, if we didn't have to do this for him, we wouldn't do it this big. But he was a showman. He was an entertainer. He started playing music professionally at 16. So you just want him to have this joy in this last hurrah, and we're going to give it to him.
He deserves it.
Such great memories watching that show growing up in Calgary. Well, we had sunshine mixed with clouds today and fairly warm in Lethbridge, but the mercury will be going up even more over the next few days. Full weather details are coming up. You know, it's been fairly nice lately to take your dog for a walk through a park or maybe down by the river valley here in Lethbridge. Jeanette Rocher is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, it'll be important, however, to stay hydrated for some of those walks, as it may get to be quite hot over the next 48 hours.
True, Hal, especially because some of us aren't used to those temperatures anymore. Now, we saw our autumn solstice come in Sunday, marking the official first day of fall. And what a kickoff. We are seeing very high temperatures, up to 29 degrees on Tuesday, 30 on a Wednesday. Like Hal said, stay hydrated if you're planning outdoor activities, especially because some of us aren't used to these temperatures anymore. But then on Thursday, we get back closer to seasonal there. 22 for the high, 24 on Friday, mainly sunny skies. skies. And then as we get into the weekend, that's where we're really getting into those average temperatures for this time of year. 19 on Saturday and 16 on Sunday with some shower activity there. Okay, so the average highs and lows for this time of year, you'll notice they're getting lower. So now the average high is 18, average low is 4. The record high on this day was 35 degrees. That happened back in 2009. And in 1926, we saw the record low, which was minus 13 on this day. So the sun rose this morning at 7:20, sunset this evening 7:25. That means we're seeing 12 hours and 5 minutes exactly of daylight today. So days are getting very, very much shorter than they were even a week or two ago. Okay, mainly sunny skies on the west coast with some fog patches happening in the morning. 22 for the high in Victoria, 15 though in the onshore winds. Also could see some 30k winds there in the Juan de Fuca Strait. 23 in Vancouver, 25 for the high in Edmonton, and a lovely 27 in Calgary expected tomorrow. Clear skies in both of those cities. As we get to the rest of the prairies here, we are seeing 20 to 40k winds in all three of these cities. Here are Saskatoon, Regina, Winnipeg, and mainly clear skies as well. 25 for the high in Saskatoon, 26 in Regina, 21 in Winnipeg. You see clouds in the morning, but then clearing up by noon there. Okay, in the central part of the country here, Toronto, 40% chance of showers or drizzle. Could see a risk of a thunderstorm as well later on in the day. 20 for the high, 22 the expected high tomorrow in Ottawa with sun and cloud. And we got some clearing skies there in Montreal with a high of 22 as well. As we get to the Atlantic Canada, 20 for the high in Fredericton, clear skies. Halifax seeing a high of 19 degrees. Fog patches in the morning in both of those cities as well. Charlottetown could see a 30% chance of showers, high of 17 degrees, and 14 for the high in St. John's with showers or drizzle ending by the afternoon. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
The union representing grain workers at terminals in Metro Vancouver says it has served the employer with a 72-hour strike notice. The Grain Workers Union Local 333 says in a post on social media that the job action would start on Tuesday. It says the union's bargaining committee made the decision after the Vancouver Terminal Elevators Association invested, quote, very little effort during negotiations last week. It is now up to the employer to present a proposal for a new contract. The union says it provided the employer with a comprehensive package last Thursday, and the next day the association indicated it had no counteroffer. Even though inflation in Canada has dropped to 2%, many people in southern Alberta are looking for ways to deal with the high cost of living. As for the unemployment rate, it appears as though more people are finding jobs. In Lethbridge, the level dropped from 5.6 to 4.9% since August. According to Trevor Lewington, the CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge, job vacancies are decreasing in our city and labor shortages are becoming an issue in many sectors.
We've got a master job board that compiles all of the different job postings from the whole region. And just this morning, there were almost 1,400 positions posted. So there are definitely opportunities out there. And where we're seeing the demand is all the same story as it's been before. Class 1 drivers continues to be an urgent need. Skilled trades, always a concern. And in particular of late, we've seen an increased need both in food service, so restaurants and hospitality, as well as retail. So there's opportunities both in the end, those sort of traditional entry-level positions, as well as skilled trades and equipment operators.
Make sure you catch the full interview with Trevor Lewington, CEO for Economic Development Lethbridge, and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up later in our broadcast. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 27 points on the day to finish at 23,894. The Dow was up 61 points to 42,124. The S&P 500 was up 16 on the day to 5718, and the NASDAQ was up 25 points to 17,974. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 29 cents to $70.71 U.S. per barrel. Natural gas was up 20 cents to $2.63 U.S. Gold was up $6.91 on the day to $26.2850 U.S. an ounce, and silver was down 48 cents to $30.69 U.S. an ounce. Feed wheat is at $7.81 per bushel, barley's at $6.10, canola's at $13.35, and corn is at $7.44 per bushel. Live cattle October contract was down $1.30 to $183.15. Feeder cattle were up 27 cents to $245.10, and lean hogs October contract was up 90 cents to $87.32. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 73.90 US. Recapping one of our top stories, with the death toll now topping 450 people, Israel's prime minister is urging civilians in Lebanon along the border to leave their homes as soon as possible. Benjamin Netanyahu issued the warning as Israeli warplanes continue to strike alleged Hezbollah targets in southern and eastern Lebanon. Israel says the terrorist group is using civilian areas to hide weapons. Residents in targeted areas were ordered to leave ahead of the airstrikes. Well, it appears as though the Israel Defense Forces has made a concerted effort to take out the terrorist group Hezbollah. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari will have details for us momentarily. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also, be sure to visit our website anytime to check out a number of stories and interviews. A number of casualties were reported following another attack by Hezbollah on northern Israel. Israeli military officials say at least 150 projectiles were launched towards Haifa on Sunday. Now, to chat about this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert and host of the Foreign Desk, Lisa Daftari, who joins us once again from the City of Angels. Now, Lisa, it appears as though another war has begun between Israel and another Iran-funded terrorist organization.
Yes, and what's I think misconstrued in the narrative of this almost 1 year war starting on October 7th is that the front with Hezbollah, and we know that there are multiple fronts in this war, and we can talk about that in a moment, but the front with Hezbollah actually started on October 8th when Hezbollah was firing missiles into northern Israel from southern Lebanon, and that has continued. Now, what it appears, based on news coverage, is that this war began because of the pager and appliance attack last week that Israel, very sophisticated, pinpointed attack that got a lot of world attention, and particularly from war experts who call this, one of the most interesting and innovative attacks that was able to target just Hezbollah operatives, etc. But again, Hezbollah themselves called this the escalation that will push us into war, but yet we knew that this war was coming in a more escalated form. We knew that it was going to heat up. They were exchanging a lot of fire back and forth. 60 to 100,000 Israelis have been evacuated from northern Israel, and we know that there have been other targeted attacks on Hezbollah leaders in Lebanon and also in Iran, as we knew about the attack on Hania as well. So this, yes, it has arrived. I know, Hal, you and I have been speaking about this for months as to when the actual Israel-Hezbollah war will begin, and it seems like it's here and it's upon us.
And Lisa, the CEO of the Hungarian firm linked to last week's exploding pagers belonging to the terrorist group Hezbollah, is currently receiving protection from the Hungarian Secret Service. The pager attacks alone killed around 30 members of Hezbollah and injured more than 2,800 others.
Yeah, and we're getting, a lot of different numbers here. Of course, Hezbollah, the terror organization, has, really diminished the numbers to make it look like not as significant of an attack as it was. But it was quite significant, not only in killing a handful, dozens at least, of Hezbollah operatives, but also injuring many of them. This is also poetic justice, and I spoke about this in a few of my interviews about how, a lot of the Hezbollah members lost their eyes, and the Islamic Republic, the regime in Iran, they're fixated on gouging out the eyes of especially female protesters who are going out onto the streets, peaceful protesters, and poking out their eyes or shooting them in the eyes. And this, again, eye for an eye, almost literal in this case. A lot of them losing their, they call this, operation below the waist. It's really an interesting, way to look at it. Obviously, pagers, they're war on their belts, but as we know, rape being another way of resistance for terror organizations and for the Islamic Republic. And here we have these operatives, getting injured below the waist. So, it was a very, very innovative attack. It was an attack that is talked about because it was planned for over such a long period of time, with Israel actually setting up businesses and being able to really intercept the shipment of going into to the Hezbollah operatives. What it actually does, another eye for an eye type of perspective to look at here is how this was now causing psychological warfare on the terror organization, where they're afraid to use any sort of device. I mean, how are they going to communicate in that way? But it has caused a lot of paranoia. You know, they don't know when the next attack is coming, but they know that Israel obviously has a very sophisticated level of intelligence and you know, military might in the sense of this innovation and the way that this attack was carried out. So causing a lot of hysteria, paranoia, psychological warfare, the same that was you know, launched on the people of Israel as of October 7th. And even before that, we saw a lot of terrorism. Terrorism is meant to cause psychological warfare, to really scare people, intimidate people. And now we have it on both sides.
And what could be next? Maybe exploding cell phones? We don't know.
Cell phones, toasters, I mean, you name it, right? The fact that the Israelis were able to intercept these. Even I want to mention the Islamic Republic representative to Lebanon was carrying one of these pagers, you know, and it really, and I know we saw a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking by a lot of useful idiots here in the West. I mean, you know, comedians and people in Congress who are defending, you know, Hamas and Hezbollah and continue to do so, you know, said things like, oh my gosh, this should be, you know, a war crime because now we're all at risk, our children's iPads and their phones. And, you know, the response by many was, well, if you're not a Hezbollah operative, you really don't have to worry about this type of attack by Israel. And that's really the bottom line, the fact that they were able to, you know, devise an attack that was so pinpointed and only got these Hezbollah operatives. So if you were carrying one of those pagers, you know, you really were labeled and branded as a Hezbollah operative.
And what's interesting right now is that the human rights chief for the United Nations says last week's incidents of exploding pagers and walkie-talkies targeting Hezbollah in Lebanon could constitute a violation of international law. During an emergency meeting with the UN Security Council, Volker Turk called for an investigation into the coordinated blast that occurred last Tuesday and Wednesday, Lisa.
You know, another episode of the circus that is the UN. Can you believe that an attack on a global enemy, Hezbollah, Hamas, they are not only fixated on killing Jews, they are against anyone in the West who does not fold under their terrorism agenda. And the UN standing there and defending them. Why would this constitute a war crime when it was just targeting, you know, operatives, terrorists, those who have American blood on their hands? I mean, just over the last couple of days, you know, the operatives one main operative who had a $7 million bounty on his head was on the US list. And Israel was able to, you know, eliminate him. But you don't hear anything about this. And yet, you know, standing here and debating whether this should be a war crime or not, until the world can get on the same page and really forget about the fact that the Jewish people, the Israelis, and not just Jewish Israelis, we have Arab Israelis, we have Christian Israelis, are fighting this fight for the rest of the world. They would fight us as well, and they have. They have American blood on their hands. They are on the US terror list. I mean, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Islamic Republic, they are fixated on the main enemy being the West. And you know, when you watch so many, again, useful idiots here in the West defending them and giving them a platform and letting them, you know, looking at October 7th as a resistance event, it's really horrific. And I think that it brings a lot of weakness and vulnerability to us here in the West. And we would be ripe for an attack such as 9/11, such as October 7th to happen here on US soil or on Canadian soil or in Latin America, wherever that they sense that there is weakness. In Europe, we're seeing these ISIS attacks sprout up again. I mean, you know, why should we be so blind and so vulnerable and so naive as to defend the narrative of these terrorists?
U.S. President Joe Biden, Lisa, said for months that a ceasefire for Gaza was in sight, it was imminent. But now officials within his own administration say it's really nothing more than a pipe dream.
Right. And that's exactly what many people are accusing the Biden administration of doing, is really inflating this dream of a ceasefire, going back to that negotiating table time and again, with, again, terrorists whose only agenda is to kill, not to make peace, not to compromise, not to give the hostages back, or else we would have had them back already. You know, a lot of people say, how could this war have been, you know, how could Israel stop? How could this war stop? How could we get a ceasefire? This ceasefire could have happened on October 8th if Hamas just gave back the hostages rather, stopped being terrorists, stopped their attacks. this war would have been over. But yet, we find ourselves in a very different position 1 year from that day, and it will continue. And I mean, it's horrific to think what these hostage families have gone through, what the hostages themselves have gone through, and to give that false hope to the families to keep continuing to quote unquote, negotiate. You can't negotiate with terrorists. The only language they understand is the language of violence and of might. And Israel kind of goes back and forth with understanding that as well, because they feel restrained. They want to go forward. They want to eliminate Hamas. They want to eliminate Hezbollah, but they feel that they have to also comply with the restraints that have been put on them by the White House. And that's what we've seen a year out. This could have been, a much faster response. I think if Israel had to go into Rafah, for example, Kamala Harris told them not to go in. Joe Biden told them not to go in. Antony Blinken told them not to go in. But yet we saw a lot of the hostages were being held there. A lot of these terror tunnels were built there. It was necessary. If we want to eliminate Hamas for the entire free world, then Israel needed to go into Rafah, go into Gaza, eliminate Hamas, eliminate Hezbollah. And when they're doing it, we see people at the White House and at the UN condemning the fact that they're fighting terrorism.
The U.S. will also announce soon that it's withdrawing its military forces from Iraq. U.S. forces, Lisa, have been in the country, as you know, since the Islamic State took control of much of Iraq's northern territory a decade ago. The 2,500 troops stationed there work to support Iraqi forces really dealing with the insurgents there.
Correct. But now what we're doing is taking it from one insurgency and giving it to another. We're taking it from the Sunni insurgency and giving it to the Shiite one. We're taking it from ISIS and giving it to the Islamic Republic. We're taking it from the Islamic State and giving it to the Islamic Republic. That's exactly what we're doing. And a lot of people forget, I think U.S. foreign policy has lost this, especially in this administration, about how the Islamic Republic, the regime inside Iran, is the original Islamic State. They swore 45 years ago to export their brand of their Islamic State, which is the Shiite agenda, throughout the region. And now we're going to hand up Iraq on a silver platter to them. That's exactly where they are, where they've embedded themselves, and 2,500 troops coming out. Look, I'm not a person for a forever war by any means, but we do have to ask ourselves what we wanted, what our goals and intentions were in being in Iraq, being in Afghanistan, and not just withdrawing and handing it over to a different terror entity. And that's exactly what we did both in Afghanistan and handing it over to the Taliban, and in Iraq now handing it over to the Islamic Republic.
Yeah, what's the plan? What's the end game, right? The big picture here.
Right. Exactly right. And if the United States wants a seat at the table, then we have to use our time differently when we do send troops somewhere. We have to take it more seriously when we do send troops somewhere. And again, if they're not making a change, why be there? Why put these military personnel and their families really in the fray if they're not going to do something that will progress American interests in the region?
U.S. Senators Marco Rubio and Rick Scott, Lisa, presented a bill increasing a reward for information leading to the capture of Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro. The reward increased from $15 million to $100 million. The reward would be paid by the U.S. government using seized assets already being held from Maduro.
Yeah, a unique approach mirroring what Maduro has done to his political enemies. So, as in Venezuela, we're living two different realities. Inside Venezuela, Maduro is, claiming that he won the election. He has abducted his political enemies. He's thrown them in jail. He has killed journalists. He really eliminates anybody who's going to be standing in his way. And now, the United States obviously has not agreed with that policy under the Trump administration and under the Biden administration. They have tried to sway, there are certain lawmakers like the ones you mentioned who find themselves trying to advocate for the people of Venezuela, really to no avail. Maduro is a power-grabbing dictator. He is, that's putting it very, very nicely. And now there will be a higher reward for his capture in order to perhaps give the Venezuelans a fair chance at nation building and a future that they want.
The U.S. federal election is coming up in November, but voting has already begun in a few states.
Yes, so very different, election landscape that we have out here since COVID, where there's early voting, there's mail-in voting. Look, all over the country, people are, particularly on the right, are very much concerned about voter fraud, cheating in the election, and are encouraging people to vote early. In doing so, they believe that their vote will be counted, that there will be more integrity. And I should say that on both sides there are individuals who are advocating for voting integrity, because if you cheat on one side, well, the next time you can cheat on the other. If the system is broken, it could be used by both sides to really rig an election. But it becomes very difficult, Hal, as you've witnessed in the last couple of elections, where the mail-in ballots are being counted at the last hour. We're worried about the legitimacy of those mail-in ballots. Are these people who are living in those states? Do some people have two ballots? Are some people dead? I mean, these allegations have all been thrown out. So what's unfortunate, Hal, is what I'm seeing on social media and by independent journalists who are investigating this is not happening, in the bigger picture. We're not seeing our bigger institutions really crack down and take a look at this. They're looking for volunteers to do this. I mean, the people who are whistleblowers are considered fringe. And so this is something that we all have to, really espouse and really dedicate ourselves to in order to figure out if there is cheating, to root it out, to make sure our system is foolproof, to make sure that there aren't polling stations that have technological difficulties, hacking, the electricity goes out. We want it all to be smooth so that we can have as close to a democratic election as possible.
She's our political reporter and foreign affairs expert and host of the Foreign Desk. Lisa Daftari, thanks so much for joining us once again from Los Angeles.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hard to believe that fall is here already. So how are things looking on the economic front for Lethbridge in southern Alberta? Well, joining me to dive into this is Trevor Lewington, CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge. Trevor, welcome back to Bridge City News. Great to have you with us again today.
Thanks for having me once again. Appreciate it.
Of course. So, Trevor, what is the overall economic trend right now for southern Alberta? How are we looking?
Yeah, we've seen some very positive gains in employment over this year, so I think that's a positive sign. We've seen, some indications, especially this week, inflation easing down to the sort of target of 2%. So that's good news. Hopefully that prompts the Bank of Canada to continue lowering interest rates, which could be a good boost to the economy. And it's September, so that means, of course, students are back in both at the university and the Polytechnic, and it's great to see stores and restaurants full of students as they return to town and bring sort of that energy and vibrancy back to our local economy. And frankly, the ag sector as well. In the very beginning of the year when we talked last, I think there was some concerns, of course, about the impact of potential drought and the impact it might have on the harvest. And so far, so good. Things seem to be holding steady in the agri-food sector as well. So overall, things are sounding pretty good out there.
Yeah, it looks very positive, that's for sure. So where are our unemployment levels at this point?
Yeah, unemployment in Lethbridge as of last month was a low of 4.9% actually, and that's the lowest rate of all the large urban areas all across the prairie provinces. If you think about Calgary, for example, it's 7.5%, and Edmonton higher still at 8.6. Our 4.9 definitely stands out, so that's good news. If you're looking for a job, it is a very tight labor market. It's definitely a job seekers market. We saw gains, for example, last month in culture and recreation. We gained about 700 jobs there. There were gains in wholesale and retail trade as well. And over the last year, we've actually seen the labor force in Lethbridge grow by almost 14,000 jobs. So there's very significant job growth over the last 12 months, which is very encouraging.
That is super encouraging. Okay, so what about small businesses? Are we seeing a decrease or an increase in business startups?
Yeah, great question. I mean, the number of active businesses in Alberta, so the province as a whole, over the first 5 months or so of the year, was actually up 1.3%. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but that's actually the highest increase across all the Canadian provinces. So 1.3 boost in the total number of active jobs is actually a good number. And we don't have any specific data to Lethbridge for this year just yet. But when we look at all of 2023, local business counts in Lethbridge were up almost 3%, so double that provincial number. So if that trend continued into this year, we're in very good shape in the small business space as well.
Yeah. Okay. So, how are these businesses faring now with the challenge of finding workers to fill job vacancies? Are there any particular sectors that are seeing more labor shortages than others?
Yeah, and therein lies the challenge, right? So good news is we have a very strong employment situation. Bad news is employers are still struggling finding that talent. Now, it has improved. So if we would have talked a couple of years ago, just coming out of the COVID pandemic, in our region, there were about 6,500 job vacancies. And now that number is closer to 4,000. That's still a lot of vacancies, but certainly an improvement for employers. It's been a little bit easier to find the talent they need. I did, for example, look, we've got a master job board that compiles all of the different job postings from the whole region. And just this morning, there were almost 1,400 positions posted. So there are definitely opportunities out there. And where we're seeing so the demand is all the same story as it's been before. Class one drivers continues to be an urgent need. Skilled trades, always a concern. And in particular, of late, we've seen an increased need both in food service, so restaurants and hospitality, as well as retail. So there's opportunities both in the end, those sort of traditional entry level positions, as well as skilled trades and equipment operators.
Okay, well, everything is sounding somewhat optimistic so far. So, what are you hearing from business owners? Are they apprehensive going into the fall Christmas season, or are they feeling optimistic?
Yeah, I do think there's still some challenges ahead in terms of affordability. Everybody is struggling with the impact of inflation over the last number of years. And although inflation has slowed to 2%, that doesn't mean prices are going down. They're still going up, they're just going up less. So, I do think that will potentially influence consumer spending this fall as we roll into the Christmas season. People are still very conscious that life is more expensive across so many things. The other challenge we have coming into Christmas this year is the Canadian dollar continues to underperform, which means all those imports are more expensive than they might have been last year. And so that's a challenge. It'll hopefully prompt people to spend more at local shops, buying local goods and boosting the local economy. The other thing that I think has businesses concerned is although interest rates have come down, consumer debt levels have never been higher in this country. And so there's an enormous pressure for people to pay interest and manage those debts. And I think it may prompt some people to forego some of the Christmas luxuries and maybe focus on their debt payments and worry about that. So we could see an impact for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and it's funny because you mentioned it's back to school time, and of course that always boosts the economy a little bit. So we probably saw a lot of people buying back to school clothes and supplies like we usually see. Did you notice any kind of a difference this year? We're talking about Christmas, sort of comparing the two in terms of the inflation rate and just how people are struggling right now with debt. Did you notice any difference going into that back to school season?
Yeah, I haven't heard any stories locally. It's a little too early to tell from a statistics perspective. There's always a lag on when we can get the data to see what September really looked like.
Right.
I know a number of school divisions this year implemented programs where parents no longer had to buy their own supplies. The school provided a set list. So I think, even the education space, typically some of that shopping is people are thinking differently about how to maybe approach it in another way that perhaps saves parents some money. So it will be interesting to see when those numbers roll in.
Very interesting indeed. Okay, so up the top there, you did mention agriculture. So, what kind of feedback are you getting from the agribusiness sector at this point?
Yeah, this is again the largest sector for the local economy. Agri-food and agribusiness drives southern Alberta, so it is critical for us. We have seen pretty strong commodity and cattle prices, for example, over this year. Prices have held steady, and cattle, in fact, has increased, driving some people to sell and make some money on their herds. As I mentioned off the top of the show, we're very fortunate in that the drought we were anticipating did not materialize. Still some concern, of course, about the levels of moisture going into next year, but certainly nothing like what we thought could have happened, sort of the worst case scenarios. So that has in fact, helped crop yields, allowed producers to get, generally their regular income that they would have seen. We avoided that debt crunch. But locally, we've also seen significant investments. So McCain Foods, their $600 million expansion in Lethbridge County, doubling the size of production will drive potato consumption for years to come, and the need for more potato acres. And then the investment by New Cold in Coaldale to build a $220 million frozen storage and distribution facility. These are big construction projects that will drive, jobs in the short term in the construction sector, but also long term as they're staffed and that they continue to grow. So again, the whole sector seems to be performing well at this point.
Okay, great. Now, how about the surrounding southern Alberta communities? How are they doing economically? Anything of note happening there? That would be the smaller towns and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, those two big projects along Canada's premier food corridor along Highway 3, of course, are helping provide spin-off benefits to all of the communities along that corridor. We have seen in Fort Macleod a major expansion by structural truss. Anyone that's driving along Highway 3 will have seen the big buildings going up along the highway. So that's been an exciting development in that region. And interestingly enough, the town of Taber is celebrating their 120th anniversary next year. And as a part of that discussion, they're sort of debating whether or not to become a city and whether or not changing their name and sort of going after a different branding makes some sense. So again, I think it speaks to the region. We've seen a number of communities grow over the last year. Our whole region grows quite well relative to the rest of the country. And we may actually have another city on the map very close to us soon.
Yeah, and it could be the corn capital of Canada. Who knows, right? We all love the Taber corn. They're famous for it. So why not just capitalize on that, right?
Exactly. Might as well build on a successful brand when you can.
Exactly. So, Trevor, are we seeing any positive signs of a turnaround for the Lethbridge and District Exhibition Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center? It's such a long name now.
Yeah, so the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center, there was an update provided to Lethbridge City Council on Tuesday, September the 17th, actually. And so far this year, the Agri-Food Hub has hosted about 240 events, and they've got another 25 to go balance of year. So that's good. We're seeing some increased activity there. There's a deficit forecasted at the end of the year of about 3.3 million, but that's an improvement over the previous forecast of 4.7. So yes, it's still a deficit, but certainly about, just about $1.4 million better than they had originally forecasted. And your viewers may remember that at the beginning of the year, that deficit was almost double that, was forecasted to be closer to 6 million. So certainly we've seen some big progress. They're focused on cutting their costs over there, hosting more events and driving revenues. So, fingers crossed, we'll see that they can continue to turn that around into next year.
Yeah, there were a lot of challenges there, but it does look like they are, sort of trying to turn that around. So good on them, definitely. So, Trevor, what are you hearing from the construction industry? You mentioned some big projects happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those big projects like McCain and New Cold are certainly driving the major project side. We've had renovations at the Chinook Regional Hospital. So there's a number of institutional projects, a new school on the west side of Lethbridge, for example, driving the sector. The other thing we've seen gain is also on residential construction. So housing starts are actually up compared to last year and up about 8% over the 5-year average. So looking back, housing starts are up, which is good. We need more housing, but that also in turn drives a significant chunk of the construction industry. So again, all indications there are quite positive, especially after a few years of declines and massive spikes in costs. We're starting to see that come back around.
Okay. What about real estate? Are we seeing any changes in the real estate market now with interest rates on the decline and some easing on mortgage rules?
Yeah, great question. I mean, the interest rates, of course, the changes have been fairly recent, so the impacts probably won't be seen for a few more months. But the expectation, I guess the good news coming out of that is there's an expectation interest rates will continue to come down, especially if that sort of drop in inflation holds. So in Lethbridge, we've seen housing prices increase about 19% this year compared to last year, big jump. The average price of a home across all categories in Lethbridge was about $391,000. So again, if you're selling, that's good news. The market is up, but that's still very affordable when you think about Calgary at an average price of about $563,000. There's still a big difference there.
Absolutely, yeah.
When we look at sales, there's been about 195 transactions year to date in Lethbridge on housing resales, and that's about 10% higher than last year. So even the number of transactions has improved. There's more activity at a higher price point. And in the foreseeable future, although there's more housing starts, it's nowhere near what we need to supply the market. Population is growing way faster than the housing market. So I fully expect to continue to see that upward pressure.
Mm-hmm. And what are your thoughts on where Lethbridge is headed, economically speaking, over the next 6 months, Trevor?
Yeah, I think overall it's good news. Everything we've talked about so far, there are many positive things that we should be excited about. I'm not too concerned about the short-term forecast. One thing we do need to be mindful of, though, is the brewing dispute between Canada and China over canola. So, the government of Canada recently announced an increase in tariffs on electric vehicles and electric batteries from China, 100% tariff. So China's undertaken a review, in quotation marks, of our exports and our practices with canola. And I think it's important for people to realize that Canada is the largest shipper of canola in the world, and China is the largest importer. And a good chunk of that affects the local economy here. Canola is a big crop in southern Alberta. So depending where that goes, there could be some major concerns in the market next year.
Okay, well, we've talked about construction and ag and real estate. We touched a little bit on manufacturing a little bit earlier, but what is the latest from the manufacturing sector? How are things shaping up there, Trevor?
Yeah, we've seen very strong growth in Lethbridge exports as a measure of our manufacturing sector. So last year, 2023, exports grew about 3% to $2.2 billion. And most of that, like I said, is manufactured goods. We've also seen very significant employment gains. So if we look at employment in 2019, sort of pre-pandemic to now, the manufacturing sector in our community has grown by 2,600 jobs. So, close to 3,000 positions added in manufacturing. I think, just going forward, the one potential risk is the US election in November. Regardless of who wins and who's in the Oval Office, both presidential candidates are very protectionist, and we could see some challenges to the exports that we produce and their access to the US market. So that'll be something we'll keep a close eye on going into the fall.
Yeah, what is our biggest, what's the biggest item that we are manufacturing and exporting out besides canola, like you mentioned?
Finished food products, so actually packaged consumer goods is the number one category for sure. Lethbridge produces everything from jet engines to aluminum extruded windows and doors, all the way through to modular structures and heavy equipment and trailers. So Lethbridge has a very diverse manufacturing sector, and not a lot of people realize all the great things that come out of here.
Seriously. No, thanks so much for your insight there, Trevor, and thanks so much for being with us today. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you having me on the show again. Take care.
You as well. Trevor Lewington is the CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.